Hi sweeties, how are you doing? Welcome to Nanyacim. If this is your first time of coming across this channel, sweetheart, kindly smash the subscribe button, turn on the notifications so you get notified each time I upload, and please give this video a thumb up. I appreciate you all, and I want to say a very big thank you to every one of you for always coming back to watch my videos, subscribing. You all are the very best. So today we'll be checking out the Red Summer and Chicago. And this was actually a riot that happened in Chicago in 1919, and it was the summer of the awakening of Black Americans. We are gonna go into details what happened, what started the race riot, and how it ended, and how people also died during the process. Stay glued to your screen. You do not want to miss out on anything. Let me roll the clip.
Historian Dilla, and infamously, Chicago is known as the most segregated city in the country. Let me tell you about the event that made that happen, the Chicago Race Riot. On July 27, 1919, Eugene Williams and a couple of his friends went swimming on the 29th Street beach on a hot day. Unbeknownst to them, the makeshift raft that they were using started to drift to the 31st Street beach, which was known as the Whyte side of the beach. A 23-year-old white guy by the name of George Starber started throwing rocks into the lake, hitting Eugene Williams in the head, knocking him unconscious. Ultimately, Eugene drowned. Black beachgoers immediately alerted the police, and when Officer Daniel Calhoun arrived on the scene, he refused to arrest George. And when black police officers arrived on the scene, he wouldn't allow them to arrest him either. Soon, large crowds gathered on both sides of the beach and a big fight happened. A 37-year-old guy by the name of James Crawford was shot and killed. That night, so-called neighborhood athletic clubs like the Reagan Colts and the Hamburgs started to drive into black neighborhoods, throwing Molotov cocktails and attacking every African American that they saw. The police did little as property was destroyed and people were attacked, and black people were being drugged off of streetcars and killed in the streets. At the end of the 7 days, over 1,000 people were homeless, mostly African American. Over 500 people were injured, 2/3 being African American. There were hundreds of arrests made, but 2/3 of them were also African American. Overall, 38 people lost their lives, 25 black and 13 white. On the one hand, there probably would have been more deaths had the black belt not had so many World War I veterans. They were able to fight off some of the attack. On the other hand, if our mayor, Bill Thompson, would have called in the National Guard after that first night, a lot of the violence would have ended there. After the Chicago race attacks of 1919, neighborhoods started to develop race covenant. Chicagoans in predominantly white neighborhoods signed contracts stating that they wouldn't rent, buy, or sell their homes to African Americans. Eventually, those covenants would be struck down by the Supreme Court as illegal, but those neighborhood boundaries still last today.
Man, the hate is too much. It is too much. How do you tell me that a boy swimming probably mistakenly moved past to a white people's, and then they started throwing rocks at him that made him drown, and he died. And the boy that did that was not arrested, and the black community also ended up suffering more losses, because make me understand this, because I really do not understand. Like, a 23-year-old child is grown up, it's old enough to know what is good and what it's not good, what is right for what is wrong. So it means from that age, they already know what it means to hate people. They already understand that, man, these people, we are not the same. And for that reason, you are not supposed to, come close to me or come near me. Because if not, how can... wait, I am really trying to understand this, because I don't know if there is something that I am missing out on, or something, I don't know. Maybe there is something I don't understand. They killed a black boy and ended up also fighting black people. Even the cops that came to arrest the boy, they prevented the man from arresting, they prevented the cops from arresting the man. So it means it is okay to kill. It is them telling them that it is okay to kill Black Americans. Because this is how I feel. This is how I see it. There is nothing anybody will tell me. What do you want to tell me that? So it is okay to kill another person. I mean, this is like, I don't know how I see this, but it's mad. Anyways, let's get into the other videos and see what people are saying about this.
The summer of 1919 was a period of large-scale racial violence and terror for Black people across the United States. It's been referred to as the Red Summer of 1919. But why did this happen? Millions of Americans, Black and white, men and women, went to fight in World War I. This left thousands of industrial jobs open in the North, and Black people had thousands of reasons to leave the South and flee north. So they fled north and took these jobs. White men returned home from the war and saw Black men taking their jobs and Black men in military uniform. This resulted in large-scale race riots across the nation, the deadliest in Chicago. An August day in 1919, a Black 17-year-old named Eugene Williams was floating on a raft on a beach that was segregated, floated across an invisible line that divided whites and Blacks. A 24-year-old white man named George Stauber began to hurl rocks at Eugene, causing him to fall off his raft and drown. This led to a week-long race riot where 38 people were killed, 500 were injured, and 1,000 Black people were left homeless. I cover the Red Summer as well as the Chicago riots in my podcast, Redacted History.
Part 2. The Red Summer. Chicago, July 27, 1919. World War I servicemen returning home from war received a violent homecoming from white supremacist mobs. While serving their country, they had experienced a taste of equality, or at least something close to it. But on the return, it was evident that racial relations had not improved. If anything, they'd grown worse while they were away. White supremacist terrorism and racial riots occurred across the country in over 36 cities, targeting Black communities. Of the 36+ cities decimated by white hatred, 25 are noted as some of the most violent and heinous. Chicago was one of those cities. The violence was ignited by the drowning of a young Black man, Eugene Williams. He drifted into Whyte's only beach area. A white boy threw rocks at him, causing him to fall from his raft and drown. Angered by police inaction and fed up, a Black man fired one shot toward a group of police and was shot dead immediately. Empowered by police inaction and angered by the news of the shooting, gangs of young white men flooded into the streets of Chicago. White men and boys sped through the streets of South Chicago and shot into Black homes. Others attacked men, women, and kids in the streets on sight. At the time, the West Side was comprised of many European immigrants, such as Irish, Czech, Italian, and Polish. Tensions were already at a boiling point in part due to resentment for Black Southerners and veterans taking jobs previously held by West Siders. Determined to fight back, Black veterans broke into an armory. Fearing an equal fight, the West Side white and European immigrant mobs quickly began to back down. After 7 long days, the ashes began to settle. 23 Blacks murdered, 500+ injured, 1,000s of Black homes burned. None of the white rioters ever faced consequences for their involvement.
It's important to note the reasons Black people moved to cities like Chicago. According to Samuel Black Jr., a 100-year-old Chicago resident and historian, 3 major factors were propelling Black Southerners forward: to escape the tyranny and violence of the Ku Klux Klan, to be able to vote without fear, and to get better education for their children.
You may laugh, but it's not funny. That's the thing that keeps me coming. Who's gonna say my woe is not a need?
So we're at the end of Black History Month. I figured I'd share another jacked up Black history fact. So I know that a lot of you became aware of the Tulsa race riots last year, but did you know that in the 19 teens and 1920s, there were actually several race riots in various cities across the U.S.? One of the bigger ones happened in Chicago in 1919. You want to know why that one started? Well, a black kid accidentally swam to the whites only section of Lake Michigan. Imagine that. And a white guy proceeded to throw rocks at him until he drowned. So when the black people went to the police to report this crime, rather than treating it as such, the police decided that the reason why the kid drowned was because the rocks made it tough for him to come up for air when he was underwater.
2020 will be defined by two things: COVID-19 and the protests that resulted from the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. But what you may not know is that 2020 was actually the second time that the country was fighting a global pandemic and dealing with race riots and protests at the same time. On November 11, 1918, World War I ended, and the world was in the middle of being decimated by the Spanish flu. By 1919, the United States was entering its third wave of the pandemic, and racial tensions were on the high because, it was 1919, but things were exacerbated by the fact that the Great Migration had started, and millions of blacks had moved up north to try to find better jobs and escape some of the racial tensions that they were facing in the South. The idea of blacks escaping racism would be short-lived because after returning home from the war, a lot of white men were finding it hard to find jobs because black men were already working the jobs and they were doing it for a lot less money. Obviously, this led to a lot of tension between the races, and on July 27, 1919, the racial bubble would burst and all hell broke loose. On that day, a black teenager named Eugene Williams was at the 29th Street beach, rafting with some of his friends at Lake Michigan in Chicago. At some point, Eugene floated to a part of the lake that was considered the white side, and a bunch of people started throwing rocks at him. One of the rocks hit him in the head, he fell off the raft, and subsequently drowned. When police arrived, they refused to arrest the white man that was responsible for Eugene's death. And this resulted in outrage and about 1,000 black people showing up at the beach to protest. During the protest, a black man was shot and killed by police, and this just made matters extremely worse because what resulted was about a week's long of riots that resulted in about 38 people being killed, 23 of which were black, 15 of which were white. It also led to about 1,000 black families being displaced after mobs of white men walked around burning homes. Obviously, Chicago wasn't the only city to see racially motivated violence. According to a 1919 New York Times report, over 60 cities saw riots and protests in that year, many of which leading to the murders of countless black people. The worst of all happened in Ulaine, Arkansas on September 30th, 1919, when over 235 blacks were massacred in a single day. Yes, 235 black people were killed in a single day. Exactly a month prior, 30 more black people were killed in race riots that took place in Knoxville, Tennessee. 1919 saw so much carnage and bloodshed that it would later be known as Red Summer. It was a term that was coined by James Weldon Johnson. It's crazy to think that so many of us might have gone to our grave never knowing that there was nothing new or unique about what we experienced in 2020. History had literally repeated itself by giving us a global pandemic and a year of black people simply fighting to just live. The Bible states in Ecclesiastes 1:9 that what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. U.S. history continues to prove that this is true time and time again.
Did you know the death of a black boy in Chicago once ignited a week-long race riot? The summer of 1919, Chicago was in the middle of a brutal heat wave. Thousands, black and white, flocked to the beaches. On July 27th, a 17-year-old black kid, Eugene Williams, was swimming with friends in Lake Michigan when they crossed the unofficial segregation barrier into the white beach area. A group of white people, insulted by this, began throwing rocks at them. Eugene was hit, slipped off his raft, and drowned. When the police arrived, they refused to arrest the white person who was responsible for Eugene's death. Black beachgoers got angry, crowd grew, tensions escalated, and fighting began. The story spread, and angry groups of young white men climbed into cars and began racing through black neighborhoods, randomly firing at homes and businesses. Other white people began assaulting any black person to cross their path. The police were unable to quell the riot, so the state militia was called in on the 4th day of rioting. But the Chicago race riot of 1919 continued for 4 more days until August 3rd. By the end, 38 were dead, 23 blacks, 15 whites. Over 500 were injured, and at least 1,000 black homes had been burned down. None of the white participants in the riot ever faced consequences for their involvement. Now you know. Like, comment, share.
I am really so much in shock, like really. And it just, and looking at how about 1,000 persons, like, homes were burned down. And do you know the hard part of being homeless, starting all over, all the things you have, being watching it being burned down, and you starting all over. I mean, it's only a wicked person. It's only a heartless person. It's only somebody with no conscience that will wake up and do evil to his fellow man. I mean, this is just where I am going to call it a day. Let's talk about this in the comment section. See you all in my next video. Bye for now.